into our pre-council workshop. 3.1, follow-up briefing on long-term residential rental business licensing. Chantal, thank you for joining us. And because this is a follow-up briefing, I'm not sure if you have anything to present or if we're just diving straight into the follow-up discussion. David?
Well, we have a slideshow.
Oh, okay. Yes. Okay.
Slideshow. Vacation.
Slideshow.
All right, give me just a second. Where are we? Do the computing. Here we go.
And Stephanie, we are live with YouTube. Thank you. Nice background. Geometric.
Let Mike get up close, please.
Hi. All right, so I'm back to talk
You
about.
might need to pull it closer.
How's that?
Good.
Is that better?
That's better.
So I'm back to talk about the long-term residential rental licensing. And then if you guys have any questions, feel free to stop me along the way. There's quite a few slides. So the two questions obviously are, do I need a long-term residential rental license? And if so, do they need to be inspected by the fire and health departments and the building department? So there was a lot of confusion around, do I need a long-term business license? And the answer is no if the owner resides on the parcel and you have 2 or less dwellings on that parcel. If you have more than 2, then yes, you would need a business license. Or if you have 1 unit dwelling on a separate parcel that you don't live on, then you would still need a business license. So that's kind of what this says. Like I said, if you live on the parcel and there's less than 2, then you're not going to need a license. Nor would you need a license if you rented out rooms inside of your home. That's not a requirement.
So you said if I'm an owner and have 2 separate parcels, and I have 1 or 2 homes on each of those parcels, I would not need a license, or I would...
You do need a license. If you do not live on the parcel, you need a business license.
Okay. Oh, because you can't live on both at once.
Right. So basically, anybody who has a long-term rental needs a license unless you live on the property and there's 2 or less and you reside there.
The idea being as much, right, like there's a lot of duplexes, and if you live on part of the property and somebody's in the other half of the duplex, you don't need a license.
So
Right.
if you had a home and you had a garage apartment and a basement apartment, you would need a business license,
Yes, that's true.
even though you lived in the house.
Right, because there's more than 2.
Okay.
So once you have 3, then you do need a business license. And so then there's the question of self-certifying versus actual inspections by the city fire and health department. And it is based off of the number of units per parcel. So if you will need an inspection if you own more than 2 dwellings on a single parcel. So you won't if the dwellings are a single or a 2-unit dwelling on multiple parcels. So does that make sense? Okay. So this is just kind of redundant. Talks about the difference between the self-certifying process and the inspections that are required for more than the 2 dwellings on a single parcel. And then we talked about, what would be the difference between your inspections and your self-certification. And obviously we're looking, as a city, a process to help us and the landlords and tenants understand the different whether it's life safety issues, hazardous materials, different types of health outcomes, everything that can be involved with tenants, owners, and the city.
So like, if I owned a house across town,
Mm-hmm.
one,
Mm-hmm.
then I would not be required to have it inspected, rented, to get a rental license.
Correct. And it wouldn't matter if you owned 3 separate houses on 3 separate parcels. You still wouldn't need inspections. But the time that you have more than 2 on one parcel, you need inspections.
So inspections only for multifamily, essentially?
Yes.
Inspections are required for multifamily?
Yes.
But other than multifamily, inspections are not required?
Yes. Yeah.
Correct.
Are we gonna say multifamily?
Right.
Whether it's an apartment complex or, a triplex.
Multifamily
Yeah.
is like 3 or more?
Yes.
Multi-dwelling.
Multi-household.
Multi-household.
Oh, you're saying about the families?
Multi-household, yeah.
Yeah.
We know what you mean.
Multi-household. So, okay, that's clarified.
In her example, if she's an owner that has 3 separate parcels, does she have to apply for 3 separate licenses or just 1 license?
She doesn't have to apply for any, because if they're 3 separate ones and 3 separate parcels, you don't need when it's only,
Actually-
Wait. To be clear,
No.
that's not, it's confusing
Oh,
because.
okay, please restate.
You do need a license. Okay, anybody who has a long-term rental needs a business license unless there's less than 2 and reside on that property. So if you have 3 separate long-term dwellings or even 1 long-term dwelling and you don't reside there, you still have to obtain a business license. The difference is between self-certifying versus the inspection process.
So let's say she lives on 1, but the other 2 offices she doesn't live on, so she'd have to get 2 licenses.
Correct.
Well, to be clear, it would technically be under 1, license, because it's really, you have essentially sort of like 1 business, but then the license would identify that you had, 1 property here, property there, property there. Does that make sense?
And so you have to pay 100, in that example, you have to pay $116 times 2, or just $116?
Not necessarily. The maximum that we could charge per long-term dwelling is $116. It doesn't mean that they have to. You could set it at that additional dwellings are $10 each, or that there's no charge.
Yeah, but I mean, assuming we go with that, I mean, the point is that if an owner has 2 properties on.
I'm not comfortable with me being the example. I only own 1 parcel in town.
I'd be liable for 2 licenses.
So you could fill out, like David said, 1 license and sign the agreement for license requirements for each address, because you're not required to have inspections, so there wouldn't be an inspection sheet attached to each one of those.
We'll talk about the payment regime or the possible fee options, way to structure the fees a little bit later.
Simple question. I just said, if you had 2 parcels that you don't live in, are you liable for 2 license fees or 1 joint?
I don't think
It's up to
that's
you.
up to me to decide.
We haven't decided what we have to decide.
Well, you're presenting all the Chantel as, first of all, you should make it clear, is this the way things are now, or is this the way you're proposing things should be? And we need to rule.
So it is up to you how you do the fee schedule. This is not what is currently in place. I am just bringing back the information that you guys requested. And if you'll give me a minute later on in the slideshow, we'll talk about the fee options.
That's fine. It just wasn't clear whether we're talking about something we might do or the way things already are. Forgive me, because last time you talked, I had no idea any of this existed. Now I find out it does, so forgive my confusion.
Okay, so with the self-certify expectations, some of those would include, the zoning compliance of the dwelling, landscaping, parking. The application would require the number of bedrooms, and we would request the number of occupants. And then again, you'd have to do a signed agreement for the license requirements for each dwelling. So now that we have the new renewal process and the new renewal fees, every 3 years, license holders must re-inspect or re-self-certify. And then here are the fees. Like I said, the maximum full cost of the city for the license is $116, and that does include the inspection process. If we took out the inspection process for self-certifying licenses, the total max could be $87, and then the license renewal fee is $26.
And when you say max, just to clarify, we aren't going to be setting the fees tonight. And the study that Cody did gave us the max of.
I understand.
Yeah.
Got it.
And there are, several different options. These are just a few examples. You could charge a discounted base rate for the first dwelling. You could add an additional fee for additional dwellings. You could charge different fees, whether you self-certify versus an inspection process. Those are just a few of the examples that you could do with the license fees. Okay.
Can we go one slide back since that'll be, yeah. Awesome. Thank you.
Mm-hmm. Okay, so
When we were
Any
talking
questions?
last time, it felt like we were kind of landing on a $26 fee, but at least from what I recall, that was what sat okay with me in terms of a fee, knowing that we could go up to the 116 or the 87, depending on how they are inspected. A lot of the comments that we've had from the community are, well, we don't want to disincentivize renters, and we don't want to put an additional burden, but we really like the idea of keeping track of who's renting property in town, and there is some processing fee. So in my opinion, I think that this $26 fee is kind of like a good fee to work from. And but I like the idea of having those who have long-term rentals in our community have a piece of paper at City Hall that says, I've got a rental, so that if and when there's a point of accountability, it's with us at the hall.
Was that then that basically the renewal and the original fee would be the same?
Yeah,
Okay.
that we would just keep it at $26.
Sure.
That way it's not going to increase the rate that a renter would charge their renter. A landlord would charge their renter. That's my biggest concern about a fee schedule for this, is that then that fee will be passed on. I mean, even if it's 116, that's still. Hello, Randy. Hello.
Take care of this.
That's just my opinion. And
So are you suggesting that just for the license, independent of the people who might need an inspection, or I just want to make sure I understood that?
I'm saying regardless of inspection.
Gotcha.
$26 across the board. You come into the hall, you pay your $26, you fill out your paperwork, and then it's here, and you pay $26 annually. Super simple.
What about, so say you own 5 single-family houses out there, and your base fee is $26. What about for the other 4 units? Would you pay another $10 or $26 per single-family house?
That's a good question.
And then remember that this does include apartment complexes as well.
Yeah. Gosh, we could tie the 26 to an individual renter, landlord. We could tie it to parcel. So like, if you had a apartment complex, you wouldn't be per unit, it would just be for the parcel. I don't know. I would say that,
Well, it doesn't seem equitable to me to
Yeah.
charge the same fee it does a single-family dwelling.
Yeah, probably not. So 26 per unit?
Why did we pick 26 instead of like
Can I, okay,
a round number?
can I just be super, super clear? So, long-term residential rental license fee, only if you have 2 or more units? No. That's your business license.
But if you reside on the parcel, you don't need a license unless you have more than 2.
Which is, if, in other words, if somebody has a 40-unit apartment complex and they live there, they still need a business license.
Right.
Right.
Okay. So
But if you-
everybody, so my situation, so I need a long-term residential license,
Yes.
and we're calling it a license, and we're now thinking it's gonna be $26 annually, correct?
Correct.
Okay. So it has nothing to do with 2 or more units.
If you lived on that parcel and you had that long-term rental, which you have, you would not need a license unless you had 3,
Gotcha.
which is more than 2.
And, for what it's worth, sort of the policy reason for that is, if you are a person living on the property, presumably you have eyes on your property, you have more responsibility. I mean, chances are you're going to have more ownership, as it were,
Right.
over the condition of the property in theory.
And we in the city know who to contact if there's a code violation.
Sure.
Right, because
Sure.
you're the property owner on site, yeah.
Okay. So this is gonna apply for our bunk houses. This is gonna apply
Yeah,
to absolutely
definitely.
everyone who has, okay,
Yes.
okay, that's, all right.
I would suggest we do a $25 fee for the initial unit, just because 26 seems difficult, and add a fee for each unit above that. If you just own a triplex that you don't live in, you pay $25 and $10 for each other unit, so $45. That doesn't seem onerous to me,
That's cool,
to a landlord.
Well, we just got really loud, Eve.
We're just getting feedback from YouTube that you guys are not.
Loud enough? Sorry.
My voice,
And then
Check,
Chantel,
check, 1, 2.
does that license,
Pull your microphone around
the
your
actual
mouth.
business license renew every year
Let's bring it to the.
or every 3?
Yes, it is a renewal process every year. However, you would self-certify or re-inspect every 3 years.
Okay, so the self-certifying and inspecting is different than the business license?
Correct.
Okay.
thanks, Mom.
You're
I guess there are a few things I just want to clarify to make sure. I assume this is on. Sometimes it's much louder than this. Make sure we're all on the same page. Sometimes I get confused with what problem we're trying to solve here. So obviously in the past, we've had licensing for long-term rentals that were over a certain size, but now we're talking about instituting them maybe for places that are smaller, right? So we had some discussions last time, like, do we want to charge for this, or if there's something we're going to be subsidizing, do we want to be making this free? I mean, I understand the arguments for both sides, because I understand there's a real cost to it, but I also understand that we keep saying housing is, such a problem, and a lot of landlords are bending over backwards to offer pretty low rents. So, what kind of messaging are we doing, but also what financial responsibility are we taking? And then there also is the question of, are we trying to use this as some kind of direct or indirect way to help with code enforcement? And so I just wanted to bring that up because I wasn't sure if we were all clear. I get confused. Like, are we trying to use this as a tool to substitute for some of our code enforcement? Are we trying to use it to help with our code enforcement? Or did we make other promises about code enforcement that we should be doing before we do this? Is it best to talk about something like this and not start charging for a year? So those are some of the questions I had for the rest of you, because I don't know.
I would be comfortable with going to no fee but requiring a license for units.
I would not recommend that simply because people just don't take it seriously, and unless there's some dollar amount involved.
And Ronnie, you said that
It's nominal.
We used to license for much larger.
I mean, I'm only asking because
Yeah, so-
I'm like Mike, I didn't know the
So
current one.
currently, if you have 2 or more, and then you have to have a license, and they are all included on one license sheet, and then there is an additional cost for each one past the initial.
So
license
currently,
fee.
what people fill out, is it basically just their contact information? Here's the address of the structure. What kind of information do they currently give us?
It's very similar to just a general business license form, so we will get contact information, the address, and currently they do require inspections.
Okay, and has that been every year or, okay.
Yeah.
What do other council members think about the fees?
I like $10.
I think we need to do something that, like David says, has some teeth to it, because if you do something that's completely nominal, people just don't take it seriously.
So 10 per unit is what you're saying?
I like that idea. I totally get it, but again, you know, that issue of trying to have housing, and then here we are, just adding more.
But I think what Ronnie asked a really good question. And what are we trying to use this for? We're trying to use it, as I understand it, as a tracking method to know where long-term rentals are in the city and who is responsible and who to contact if there's a code violation.
As well as doing preventative maintenance, arguably, where we have more contact up front with the landowner to say, here are the expectations for you as a landlord out of the gates, you know?
So that's part of the question too.
Sidewalks.
Like, is the idea that they're going to get a packet of paper or something they're going to have to initial every page? Like, okay, I've read my parking code. I've read my, I know how much trash I have to provide. I didn't know if we had to add trash here, if it just falls under zoning compliance generally, but since that's been one of the complaints we get, yeah, because I wanted to make sure if we were charging them something and we were trying to use this towards our code enforcement, so presumably they would have some kind of documents where they're
Yes.
on record as having.
Precisely.
And then does that change anything for the neighbors who are having problems who live next door? Same process, file a complaint with Mona, and this just means it probably saves Mona a little time in terms of tracking down who the owner is to contact them?
Right. I mean, again, on the front side, you're giving people expectations up front about what you are expecting them to how you're expecting them to maintain the property very directly. So I think that's important. And then, yeah, on the back side, if somebody does file a complaint, it's a lot easier if we know who the landlord is on record, and instead of maybe, because it could be like the property could be under a trust's name, and you know, it just can create real challenges in terms of trying to figure out who's really responsible as the landlord.
Yeah,
So
I'm
it
trying
helps
to
that
remember,
way.
and this maybe is more a question for Mona, but on our enforcement end, like I can't remember if we, initially send an information letter and then we have a follow-up letter, like because you have someone on record who's already, signed off that they've read this stuff, can you ever skip a step then? And it's like, okay, well, we have you on record as having, instead of getting initial information and then warning and then, maybe you go straight to warning, or?
Yeah, I think that's right. I mean, I think
that
it
would
just
make some people feel a little better.
I think it would definitely be quicker, and I think we'd have more consistent ability to reach people. We'd still want to do warnings, kind of a fix-it ticket type thing first before really, give people a chance to fix the situation before issuing fines. But it would definitely help us with enforcement, no question.
We had a really good example of this out on Wagner a couple of years ago. There was an old abandoned trailer that sat on a piece of property that was the raccoon condo. The owner lived in Salt Lake, and he wasn't well. He had some health issues, but nobody could get a hold of him.
Was someone renting it, or just the raccoons?
No, it was abandoned, and it was full of raccoons and
Okay, well that's
mattresses and boxes. And I think finally, did the city go clean it up? Do you remember?
I think so, yeah.
And I think I think he hired somebody, and we kind of cleaned up the carnage afterwards.
Yeah, there was.
But it took months to even find out who the owner was to contact.
Yeah.
And I think ultimately, if I remember right, he paid someone to come clean it up, but they didn't clean everything and we just.
Yeah. How does a
clean up the-
system like this, though, that's for, like, if he wasn't, a long-term rental or landlord filling this out, how would it capture
But
him?
it's just, it was just a person that
Gotcha.
we couldn't get a hold of. And so if a renter says, well, I'm not gonna fix this because this isn't my property, then we at least have contact with the property owner.
Yeah, I think we're all agreed on. So Chantel, I want to second what Ronnie touched on. If you're going to have a self-certification process, and then there needs to be some statement of policy made about what happens if you fail the self-certification process. Suppose you claim, hey, we're obeying all these expectations, but the neighbors say, no way. So some way to reconcile that, I'm sure, be warnings and stuff. We're not going to be hard-nosed about it. I think something needs to be said about the expectations and what happens if the expectations aren't met.
Yes.
Well, you
I
lose-
agree.
And you lose your license, right?
Right.
That's the ultimate threat, which is a great leverage for us as a municipality to say, you follow these like agreed upon codified rules of the neighborhood, then you get all the rights to.
And let me clarify for me, these rules that we're drafting here now apply not only to onesie-twosies kind of thing, but to apartment complexes, commercial. Is that correct?
Correct.
Right? Okay.
Yes.
So whatever fees we all come up with should be suitable for relatively large commercial things and mom and pop. We talked on that last time too, because I think most people, people I've met who rent a house out, maybe for their kids or for people they don't know, whatever, feel it would be burdensome, if we tack them with a big fee.
What about 10 per unit, not to exceed $50?
Then you'd have apartment complexes with 40 units that would only have a $50 license.
But it's only one agency that would hold that it's only one applicant.
I think there should be at least 26 because that's the actual cost. Yeah, especially if we're waiving the initial application fee, which is apparently a much significantly higher actual staff cost. And $26 a year is just not that much in this rental market.
And I will say the reason for, the difference in the multi dwellings, a lot of their fire inspections are different, their building inspections are different, the types of things that they're required, fire suppression systems, all that kind of stuff. It's really important that we do the inspection process on those.
Another request I got for Chantel, I'm confused. Some of your slides say, you talk a lot about dwellings on a particular parcel. Do you intend for that to be the same thing as the number of units on a parcel? Or is that going to envision a parcel with a building on it? You might call it a dwelling, but it's multifamily housing, and there might be several units, apartments in that, which I think you should clarify.
Would you say a dwelling is a kitchen? A kitchen defines a dwelling, just like it does in regular house land, or?
Yes, a dwelling is, yes, essentially. So a dwelling and a unit are probably the same in terms of this conversation. We've just had historical issues with the term unit here at the city, with that being a confusing term. And so we tried to really go with dwelling, where it's, a dwelling, if you have a 5-unit apartment complex, that's 5 dwellings.
Okay, so I'm gonna put my auctioneer hat on here. So we got 0 over here, we got 10 over here, we got 25 and 10, we got 26, and each additional unit is 26 for the first, and how many additional?
26.
26 for every single unit, and you were landing, Mike, at what was your fee proposal idea?
Well, if you're going to cover larger apartment buildings commensurately, you guys probably, your maximum use, maximum contract. But it could be proportional in some respect to the number of units. If it takes you longer to check out these places, then I think you ought to cover your costs substantially.
So covering costs would be 116. or 87, depending on the
You're
certain.
talking about renewal fees.
Well, then the renewals would be 26.
Yeah, the question was, do you want to make that fixed cost, or do you want to have the cost portion in some fashion to the size, the number of dwellings? Is that what we're talking about?
Yeah, so I was just, so I'm trying to pull everybody together, at least so we know what each other's thinking, so we can get on the same page and come up with a fee.
While
Yeah.
Mike's ruminating on that, so are we gonna try to implement a good landlord program?
Yes.
And then, are the annual fee, like, will there be, let's say we land at $25 or $10, will the renewal, I mean, we're gonna still try to keep to that? I mean, it seems like if you're a good landlord, I mean, what we really want is just the documentation.
Well, go ahead.
In order for a good landlord program, in order to get people to sign up for that, you're going to have to incentivize that program.
A high
And they are
fee.
done by a high business license fee. And then if you sign up for the good landlord program, you either waive the business license fee or, make it a small, fee. And then if they violate, have any code compliance issues, you can, say, now you're back to $200 a year for your license or, different things like that.
Yeah.
Well, I do want to say for us right now, this feels like a good first step, because then everybody is at least signed up.
This is good landlord light.
This is good landlord life.
Because the biggest difference between this, in terms, other than the fee structure, and what a true good landlord program is a landlord being required to go through all the classes, right? Which is a really important thing, but we're at least taking a baby step that way by saying, here, fill out, acknowledge that you've read these forms and you know the code and that kind of thing.
Is this gonna be possible online?
Yes.
Yes?
It
Even
is.
the class? Like, can we,
There's no classes right now.
but we could, like, you have to, all the documents that you would hand out, could have it on a document online on the city of Moab.
So we plan to have all business license renewals this June. We're hoping to have those online. We're in the process, and we hope to make it by the June 1st deadline.
So let's try to narrow down on this fee. So we're between 0 to 10 to 25 to 26. How do we feel?
So now I'm concerned about implementing a good landlord program, and then what the public might perceive is if we bump the fees up so that we can then offer a significant discount for being a good landlord, it's going to just look like we increase the fees 200%. So it might be advantageous to set the fees as high as we're comfortable now, so that then we can, when we implement the good landlord program, we can offer a substantial discount without simultaneously raising the fees.
So I would not be in favor of that, but that's a good logic. That's good logic. But I still wouldn't want to charge renters more than 10, 26, somewhere between 0 and 26.
You mean landlords?
But we would be at that point in like a year, not now.
Yeah, in a year,
Maybe,
the
unless this works.
the landlords will say,
But this
look, you
could
just
also
jacked
work.
my fee up like 300%.
Yeah, but this could also work. I mean, if in a year of implementation of getting people to sign up and we're holding renters accountable to code standards, I mean, that's the effect that we'd hope for a good landlord program anyway.
Mm-hmm.
So,
And if we're giving out, I don't know what your plan is, but I'm assuming you'll give those landlords a little packet or
Yes.
direct them to someplace online that they can read what the expectations are.
Yes.
We would hope
Yes.
that they would share that with their renters.
Correct.
Correct?
Yes. And we will have all that information online for renters as well. And even, it's also to protect the renter, not just the landlord.
So I guess I have one related question, because I have had several people say to me, well, it kind of feels like you guys are doing this because of a few bad eggs, and most of us are good landlords, and I can understand all the reasons for our true costs for doing it, but I did wonder, because this is tied in some ways and not entirely to our code enforcement issues, if we can, obviously this will come back as some kind of, I can't remember if this one is ordinance or code change, right? If we can then also commit to looking at, because our code enforcement is somewhat proactive in the sense that we look for illegal short-term rentals, if we can look at what it would take to be a little bit more proactive. Like I've noticed, PD seems to be great. I mean, they stop and check on, what appears to be illegal overnight camping. I'm just curious to know what would it take to be more proactive, and maybe they already are, but about some of the things that we get the most complaints about. So the parking, the landscaping, the trash. But I'd be interested in knowing what that would take, just while one's driving around, just to be fair across the board and look for, egregious, mattress in the street kind of stuff. Yeah.
Right, because I was going to say, if we really were going to be,
I don't need anyone out
holding
there with a rule or
everybody
measuring every grass, but
right to the letter of the law,
no, but I mean, you know what I mean.
I think
overflowing
I do.
trash or
Yeah, I mean,
varmints and
sure.
Yeah, mattresses.
I think that does. You're right. That does happen to a certain degree, but it is more like the most egregious cases, and typically the things that are most, in a lot of cases, are most obvious and most obvious for over time. As opposed to like somebody left a mattress out and it's there for a week and then are things like, oh wow, there's a bunch of RVs now parked and camped there for 2 months. So that is a lot of what you're right. We do end up having more sort of, by I don't want to say by chance, but a police officer drives by and is like, wow, that's the third time 3 days in a row and I've seen that trailer there or whatever. So I guess ultimately it's all about bodies. And if we wanted to, if the council decided that you wanted to dedicate more resources to a person whose job was to go out and be more proactively patrolling the neighborhoods basically for civil code enforcement opportunities, then that's just a person to pay for to do that.
But to get back on our fees, I really would like to just, this is a really good conversation, but we've got to kind of settle on a fee, because that's the point of this, is the business licensing fee structure.
I'm okay with the 26, that's a short answer. But to answer your question, what I would like to ask of you guys, I don't know if we've given you enough clear direction or not, a lot of ideas have been thrown out, but I would like to see what the actual ordinance rules are going to read.
So you want to see the forms and the
No, I don't need necessarily see the form, but I want to see what the rules are going to be. Chantel, I wrote you from your charts, I hypothesized what some language might actually look like, and we detailed out some of the ideas that we talked about here. It throws out some fees. We may well agree to something different than that, and that's fine. But I'd like to see how the language is going to read, because otherwise I can't tell exactly what it is I'm going to be signing off on.
Well, that was the idea tonight, right? We were discussing, and then if we gave you guys some movement forward, you're going to write something up for us, right? Correct.
You still would need to approve probably a code change, and so that would be an ordinance, and then either adoption of the fee by resolution, or if someday we get to the code of the master fee schedule, that would actually be a code change as well. So either way, we'd be bringing you back materials for approval.
Yeah, that'd be great. Yeah. That way you guys can help narrow us down, throw out the worst ideas out there, and you can kind of narrow down the scope and throw something out that we can all say.
Can we all narrow it down just as a council right now, though?
I'm good with $26, but I think we ought to charge at least $10 for each additional unit. I think there should be an additional charge for each rental, whatever you want to call it.
26 for the first, 10 for each additional. Does that feel like a good compromise, or does anybody feel pretty heartburned about it?
I'm willing to consider it, but again, I feel like if we're charging people, we have to offer them something back. So I would like to see what it would charge to do some slightly more aggressive code enforcement on some of those issues. I don't know what kind of manpower it would take, but some information on what that would look like.
So one thing that I'd really like, which I mentioned last time, is that if there is law enforcement response on a rental, that the landlord gets notified.
Yeah, that would be a procedural thing for sure. We could enact that without needing to do much in terms of code.
Okay.
So, Kaylin, that would include everything from there was a code violation with trash or whatever, I don't know what it would be, to we had a complaint of a loud party or something, just to keep the landlord aware of what.
Exactly, because otherwise they may well not be informed.
Forgive me for clarifying, a single family home?
Well, that would be justification enough for the fee. That's justification enough for the fee.
Yeah, I think that's real value.
Yeah.
A single-family home with one kitchen and 3 bedrooms, that's considered one dwelling? Or
Correct. One dwelling.
Right, and that's exactly why we go with the word dwelling, because sometimes people think of bedrooms as a unit, depending on how you're talking about
But
it.
for those unusual structures we have, I think we have a few where maybe there's like a shared kitchen and, 7 rooms or something. It's still one dwelling, yeah, just
Correct.
just remind oneself to go by kitchen. Okay.
So is that a reasonable thing to ask of you guys for direction, since we're gonna have to vote on waiving an ordinance, to go ahead and propose something the best you can, that we can kind of narrow it down from there? Because I think we're headed the same place.
Yeah, I mean, I think if you all tell us the fee, we'll have everything else pretty well dialed out
So
and ready to
26
bring
and
back.
10. We can move forward with 26 and 10. And,
If you can throw them in there, and then we can, mark them up later on if we want.
No, we need to give her direction. We need to give them
we have to make a
direction.
decision. We have to make a decision so that we can give direction.
We don't have to do anything of the sort. I'm asking for a broad outline of how the ordinance is gonna read. You can put in placeholders of the fee. You can put in 26, and we can redline them later on. There's nothing wrong with that.
But we need to know what to at least start with. And it sounds like 26 and 10 is going to be what we plug in. And then
As a
if you all
placeholder.
have a
Are you comfortable
epiphany
with
that
that as a placeholder?
it's going to be 25 and 9, then you can change that.
Well, then that feels good as a negotiated placeholder number.
Okay,
Okay.
great.
Thank you.
Fabulous.
That
Thank
was
you.
really helpful. Our next item, 3.2, is an initial briefing on the consolidated fee schedule. It is 6:50, and so I'm proposing that we actually put that for next council meeting. Is that okay? Thank you,
I
Shannon.
would be totally fine with that, yes.
Council, are you okay with that?
Yes.
So we can just take a 10-minute break.
Thank you.
Okay,
Great.
10-minute
Thank
break.
you,
Thanks,
Chantel.
Got exciting there. Yes, 10 minutes.
Yeah, just
Don't go
take me
too
off the
far.
knees.
No
Sit
donut
down
shop
on the floor.
for you.
So we ended up having that. I think they didn't realize there was a
Oh,
so I didn't get to go to the other. Yeah.
Yes.
Yeah, sure.
I should know, but I just never have to enter it.
they're going to talk about water capacity and the consultant's going to be there and it's going to be great for you guys.
I couldn't do it. I was like moving around. I had to call Kayla.
I could have done it, but I just felt like it was a staff.
Yeah,
As opposed to being directly in the planning commission.
I know, but yeah. I don't know if it would have mattered, but
Yeah, I don't, any of them will go.
yeah. But the thing is, I was thinking, fortunately,
Was that?
more.
Oh gosh, well, aren't you
Right.
going to hear my
Right, for the
report
planning
here in
commission.
10 minutes?
Yeah.
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 It was a great idea, for sure. Make sure.
Hey guys, I don't know if we're just like,
Yeah.
just so you know.
We'll get the county planning. Logistics side. He'll be adequate. I'm sure.
Barely adequate.
Barely, yeah, sufficient.
It'll be tolerably effusive.
Adequately adequate.
So it is happening tomorrow.
Yes, this is the initial steering committee kickoff. It's fairly short notice. I don't know that everybody who's invited can make it, but it'll be a start.